The main focus of this slideshow is to look at the geography of the whole of South America. First thing we need to look at is the location of the countries that we don't know yet. And so out of the 13, we have already seen 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so now we got to look at the next ones. Brazil is number 1, and Brazil is that big green one right there. Ecuador is number 2. Ecuador is the small yellow one right there. Kind of hard to see my 2 on there, but here I'll change to black. 2. Okay, and then Peru will be number 3 right here in orange. Bolivia number 4. Bolivia is right there. It doesn't touch the ocean. That's how you can remember that one. And Paraguay don't touch the ocean. Okay, and so Paraguay is right here. Chile is the skinny one on the side. Argentina is the bigger one on the bottom. And then Uruguay is this small orange one right there. And so find the location of each of these countries and label them on your notes. Now I just want to quickly touch on some of the major physical regions in the areas. The first one is the Andes Mountains. The Andes Mountains are a pretty major mountain chain. They're actually the longest mountain chain in the entire world. It runs all the way from the bottom of South America all the way up the west coast to the very top, and it splits into those cordilleras that we talked about. So it's not the largest mountain chain, but is the longest in length. So it was the Andes Mountains were created because of the tectonic plates. And what happened is the Nazca plate started to subduct under the South American plate about 80 million years ago. Okay, and so as this Nazca plate was going underneath the South American plate, it was obviously causing volcanoes and all of those things that happen when a plate subducts or goes underneath another one. But the force from it actually buckled the South American plate, and it caused the land to buckle upwards, and it created the Andes Mountains. And so this 80 million year crash that's been happening is causing the growth of these mountains, and within them also volcanoes, because the subduction continues to happen. The Atacama Desert is the second major physical region we'll talk about. It's along the west side of the mountains, so it's pretty narrow. There's not much room there for it, and it is the driest desert in all of Earth. The Pampas are found mostly in northeastern Argentina, and it's a very, very large area. It's 250,000 square miles of grassland, and this grassland is where if you don't count Brazil, this is where most of the commercial farms are in all of the other countries. Back before people kind of started to really populate the area, the grasslands, it was such a fertile grassland that there were 10-foot tall grasses all around this area. So very, very fertile land, good for farming. The Altiplano is a high plateau that you find in the middle of the Andes. And that's mainly in Peru, and it's a plateau that's they're actually also called cordilleras, but there's these like alleyways of mountains running through that make up the Andes, and in between those alleyways there's this big plateau that's very, very high up in elevation, and that's in Peru, and they're very, very wealthy as far as resources, because they have metals such as silver, zinc, tin, and lead that are used all around the country for it. So the next one is going to be the Amazon River. The Amazon River is the river that it's the second largest river, longest river in the world, but it also carries the most water in the world. So it carries more water even than the Nile, and actually every single second it dumps out 58 billion gallons of fresh water into the ocean. And so there's a lot of water flow going through this very long river that's found in the rainforest. The reason that the Amazon River has such a a huge amount of water flowing through it is because it has this huge chunk of land, 2.7 million square miles of land right here, this whole green area here that makes up the Amazon basin. And the Amazon basin, if you think of it, it's like a giant bowl that every piece of water that hits anywhere in there funnels down and finds its way to the river. So every rain, every bit of rain, every bit of everything coming from the sky goes down onto the ground and funnels its way into the Amazon River. And that's why there's 58 million gallons of water, or sorry, 58 billions of gallons of water per second being pumped into the ocean from this area, all because of that basin. The Brazilian Highlands is another major physical region. It's most of the country is the Brazilian Highlands, and you can see that. I'll do green here. Okay, but this is most of the country is the Brazilian Highlands, and it's located in the south, and there's a lot of hills and grasslands and plains and forests. They're just higher up in elevation is why they're called the highlands. Within the Brazilian Highlands, there are also pretty high plateaus with a bunch of different resources that they can pull out as far as minerals go. When it comes to climate in South America, just like climate everywhere, the location is the most important thing. The further north you go, the warmer it is. So it's the opposite of North America, because as you go north, you get closer to the equator, whereas in North America, as you go south, you get closer to the equator. So remember, as you go further north, as you go closer to the equator, it's going to be warmer. You have to almost think of it like it's actually closer to the sun. It's closer to the heat source that we have. And so latitude makes pretty much the biggest difference. El Nino is another kind of weather climate event that happens consistently, and El Nino is when the ocean water along the west side, along the western coast of South America, warms up. And as it warms up, it causes more and more water to get up into the air, and then all of a sudden that water, or that air with all the water in it, goes over the land and it cools down and it dumps all that water down onto the land in the form of rain. So it causes very heavy rain in the coastal region, and sometimes if it's powerful enough, it can mess with weather patterns and rainfall in the US as well. The furthest south, all the way down to the very south part of South America. So the coldest part of South America is pretty similar to our southern states in the United States. So like Georgia or Florida or Texas, it never gets really cold. Sometimes it gets down below freezing at least a few times every year. But you don't see much snow or anything like that. In northern Brazil, it's almost all tropical, so warm and heavy rains all the time, and it varies a lot more in southern Brazil. So there are a few different climates, but mostly it's subtropical, again, kind of like that Georgia, Texas, Florida type of a climate. In South America, because of the high mountains, you also see of the Andes, you also see vertical climate zones, which is a new thing we haven't really talked about that much. We know that elevation affects climate. We know that the further you go up in the air, the colder it is. But how does that affect like the land and what grows there and what you can use the land for and all that kind of stuff is what we're talking about. Because at different places on the mountain, depending on how high it goes up, it's a different weather, and so different plants can grow there and everything. It's just very different. And so in the Andes, as you can see on this diagram here, all of these lines, as you go down, it actually gets warmer and it gets drier, okay, because the rain dumps off and snow and everything dumps off at the top of the mountain, and then there's no rain or snow left at the bottom of the mountain when the air gets down there. It's quite dry, okay. And so up at the top of the mountain, the very top, above 16,000 feet, there's nothing up there but snow. Nothing can grow because there's constantly snow there. It's below 20 degrees all the time. When you go up above or down to that 1,200 to 1,600 feet line, the trees can't grow up there, and so there's no more trees that can grow up that high because it's consistently too cold for them, and so it's just grasses and bushes and things like that. And as you go down, you can do increasingly more warm weather things. So the next level right in here is, normally 55 to 65 degrees, and so potatoes, wheat, barley, apples, the kind of things we grow here. And then as you go down even further, it gets into a little bit warmer weather like coffee, corn, and citrus fruit like Mexico. And then you go down even further, and these are the more tropical plants that can be grown. And so that's kind of the vertical climate zone. As far as the Amazon rainforest is another giant ecosystem that exists, and it's mostly around the Amazon River in northern Brazil. It's a very large ecosystem. We'll talk about it on the next slide. Okay, now to talk about the Amazon rainforest. The Amazon rainforest, it has the most plants, the most diverse plant species of anywhere in the entire world, and also has many animals that live within there. It is kind of like the air filter of the world because the trees are taking out the carbon dioxide and creating oxygen there. It's also kind of, or it's been known as like the pharmacy of the world because a lot of medicines come from plants that are only found in this region. And so it's a very important region in the northern part of Brazil. Now, most of the animals that live there live in the canopy. The canopy is the very top leaves of the rainforest trees, and the very top leaves are so thick that they really keep any of the sunlight from reaching the ground. It's kind of like a leafy tent, and so you don't see very much sunlight getting down there, so little tiny trees and things like that don't have much of a chance to live. So not much is growing on the ground. Almost all of the nutrients go into the trees, which makes them even bigger. And the trees do have fruit all the way up in the top, and so you see most of the animals live up there because they want to be able to eat that and then eat the animals that eat the fruit, and on and on and on and on. Okay, and so the other thing about it is the soil is not very good down in the bottom because those trees have gotten so big and require so many nutrients that all of the things that fall down that are dead, whether it's leaves or animals or whatever, they decay really fast because of the weather. And because of the bugs, and as they're decaying, all the nutrients go down in the soil and they're sucked up instantly by the trees, and so the soil is not very good to grow anything else, and it's not sunny enough to grow anything else, so it's kind of tough for anything but trees trying to grow in the area. They're also throughout the rainforest in different parts is flooding, and flooding is an issue. Especially during wet seasons, but there are two different kinds of flooded rainforests. And the first one is the Agapo. Agapo is a permanently flooded rainforest, so that means it is always flooded. No matter what, it's flooded, and so it's water down there, and then trees grow up out of the water. This is because the rivers have gotten too full. And so in these permanently flooded forests, there are fish swimming around in the forest because it can be up to like 40 feet deep, this rain can. And so that's a little bit of, it's just a little bit different than you see. These two ecosystems are kind of mixing. And so in this permanently flooded forest, you see jaguars who have adapted. They can climb really well. They always have been able to, but they can also swim really well, and they attack and eat the caimans, which are like Amazon rainforest crocodiles, basically. And so they can swim as good as anything. They can jump and climb the trees and live in this flooded rainforest. And then there are piranhas there, and they are carnivorous fish, and so they eat meat. And so as some of these different animals are going around, the piranhas can and will eat them. Okay, the Varzea is also a flooded rainforest, but it's only temporary. It's only during the wet seasons. And so this interesting thing is with this water getting like 40 foot deep, the trees, they really rely on the fish to come in because the other animals can't really hang out there anymore. They rely on the fish to come in and eat the fruits that they have and spread their seeds and continue to grow more trees. So it's just a little bit different. It's a mixing of ecosystems. Throughout the area, there really isn't that much farmland because of the mountains and all kinds of different weird physical regions that are happening, and so there's a little bit, but not a whole lot. But in the Pampas, that, remember, is this big grassland, and it's really good for cattle ranching because it's a big open grassland, a little bit too dry for things to grow all the time, and so it's better for having cows walk around eating grass, and then you sell or use the cows. And so this is where the original cowboys came from, and these are gauchos, and this is a picture of a gaucho. And a lot of the ideas that our cowboys in America had came from here. I mean, they wore the spurs, they had the lasso, they have the big hat, they have all of these different things that American cowboys would later incorporate. And back in the colonial days, these cowboys were rounding up all the cows and exporting their hides, exporting their skin back to be made into different leathers and cowhide items in Spain. Okay, and so that's the Pampas. In the lowland areas, it's really the only areas with big farms, commercial farms, because the mountains make it difficult anywhere else. In the Andes Mountains, there are a lot of different ores, so a lot of different metals, and it's very rich in gold and silver and copper, and so a lot of people have been drawn to the region because of the riches that are stuck in these mountains. And lastly, for land use outside of Brazil, is hydroelectric dams. And these people are generating a lot of power by using falling water. And so they dam up the river, and then they can generate electrical power. We've already talked kind of about how that works. But it does have environmental consequences. In Chile, in the Biobío River, they dammed up, and it has caused a lot of flooding, and the flooding has happened mostly in native lands, and a lot of the natives have been forced from their homes that their people have been inhabiting for thousands of years. In Brazil, the land use is similar in some areas and different in some. In the Amazon basin, the main source of income, the main source of money, is through logging. And so logging means cutting down or using trees to make money. And so some of it's cutting down trees and using the wood for, different fancy trims and flooring and stuff in people's house. But also some of these trees are creating other things. So that would be timber. But some of these trees are creating other things. Some of them are creating rubber, and so you can see this rubber tree right here down in the middle, okay? And the rubber tree, what they do is they cut it and they collect the sap, and then they go through a process and they can create rubber out of this sap. And so that's kind of interesting. And then also they have many palm trees, which allows them to have palm oil, which can be used for a number of different uses. For both cooking and kind of skincare type stuff. And lastly, most of the farming and ranching in Brazil happens in the south, in the plains parts of the highlands that are down there, because it's not the bad soil of the Amazon rainforest, and the weather's good and all that kind of stuff. So it's a good place for farming and ranching. Okay, so where are the people and what are they like? Most of the people live in coastal cities. They live close to the ocean because they have historically needed that to move their products from one area to another. And so there's really not that many people living in places like Paraguay right here that has no access to the ocean, and Bolivia right here that has no access to the ocean. And even in Uruguay, there are not that many people living there. And so in the Andean countries, in Peru and Chile in particular, the ones where the Andes run up through here, most of the people there are mestizo or native. So they're either a full-blooded native or they have mixed between native and Spanish. And in Argentina, it's most of these people look like European people. They look like people that you'd see in Italy or see in Spain or anything like that. So we kind of know about Argentina's football team, and they don't have that same mestizo look as Mexican people or something like that, because most of the people in Argentina are Europeans. In Brazil, they're this incredible mix. And so what has happened is European people have been there for a really long time, African people have been there for a long time, and Native American people have been down there for a really long time, and they've all mixed together. And so it's like this big mix of European, African, and Native American ethnicities, and all of the people have kind of melded into a Brazilian person. In Brazil, they're huge, huge cities, and they're amongst the coast mostly. But I mean, some of the biggest cities, the biggest city in Brazil is 19 million people, and it's called Sao Paulo. And it is the third largest city in the entire world at 19 million people. Very, very crowded city, as well as a crowded city of Rio de Janeiro, where 12 million people live, and that is the 16th largest city in the entire world. And so both of these are bigger than any city in America or Canada. You know, Sao Paulo is bigger than Mexico City, but Mexico City is bigger than Rio. So of all the cities we've talked about, Sao Paulo is the largest one so far. Okay, so to talk a little more about the major cities of Brazil, Sao Paulo, that really, really big one, is right in the heart of their industrial region. So where their factories are and where most of their industry is, most of people work there and all that kind of stuff, that's where Sao Paulo is. It's at the financial center of Brazil and really South America. It is on the port of Santos, and the port of Santos, it handles the more shipping than any other place in all of Latin America. Over 50% of the shipping in Latin America happens in that one port, and so the coasts are very overcrowded. Like I said, those coastal cities where people live, and you can see right here, all these big cities, all these red dots are right along the edge except for a few. And so it got really, really overcrowded. And so Brazil tried to take some action, and in 1956 they made their capital of Brasilia, and Brasilia is right there. Okay, that red dot right there, and it was built in the interior, in the middle, in the kind of the geographic center of the country. And so they built it there. They made it very fancy, very modern to try and promote people coming into the interior, coming into the middle of the country and living there. So they wanted to settle and develop the interior part of the country. Manaus is up here. It's on the Amazon River. Okay, and it's a smaller city, but there are 1.6 million people living there. So it's close to the size of Minneapolis, and it's in the Amazon rainforest, and they really want to promote development there too. And so what they've done in Brazil is to create a free trade zone, and so a free trade zone is where they basically say any company can come in here and work from here, and they will have no tariffs or taxes charged to them by Brazil if they want to send products away or build products here. And so it's this really cool opportunity to be kind of running your business tax-free if you're just willing to have your business be in the middle of the Amazon rainforest, which a lot of people aren't, but just kind of an interesting look at it. And this is kind of the rubber manufacturing center of Brazil. All right, so the city structure, the way that the cities are structured in South America and in Brazil in particular is they have a city center, which you can see up on the very top part of this picture. Okay, and the city center is where the business district is, and then all the rich people live really close in by that. Okay, and then on the outskirts, as you move away from the center, from the rich neighborhoods, you get into very, very poor neighborhoods, and these very poor neighborhoods are often called favelas. Okay, and a favela is an extremely poor neighborhood, and they're built oftentimes on these steep hillsides where they have to end up building houses on top of other houses, and they're very, very poor, bad neighborhoods. They're literally, their houses are built out of bricks that they find or garbage. I mean, they're shanties like we talked about happening in the early 1900s in America, and there's about 14 million people in Brazil living in these houses that are essentially made out of garbage and refuse. They're built on top of each other. There's no space in the favelas. There's often no paved roads, no electricity, no water supply piped in, no toilets, no sewers, none of that. And so you're dealing with a very primitive way of living in these favelas. And it's important that you know what a favela looks like versus what the rich neighborhood looks like. So I showed you two pictures and you can kind of see the overview. All of these little tiny places all kind of stuck together is the favela in this picture, and then this picture kind of shows how they're all built on this super steep hillside where nobody else would want to build, and all have to be built on top of each other. And the big problem in Brazil is there's a major gap between the poor people and the rich people. As a matter of fact, 10% of the people in the country own over 70% of the land in the country, which leaves only 30% for the remaining 90% of people, including middle class all the way down to these people that live in the favelas. So very, very big gap between the poor and the rich.